speak to him. You look somebody in the eye and go, you see who's making the decision at Man United? You still have Ferguson and David Gill hanging on like a bad smell. Who's making the decisions? Cliff? Wilcox? Who's coming into this interview process and you're speaking to a manager? You've done it, you've interviewed manager. You'll sit and get a feeling for somebody, but he's the guy for us.
Yeah, morning and welcome to the second hour of Sunday Supplements. Still so much more to talk about this morning, including Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea, and tonight's El Clasico, which is being staged in Saudi Arabia. With us, our sports journalist and commentator, Jackie Oatley, Jonathan Northcroft, chief football writer for the Sunday Times, and Miguel Delaney, chief football writer for The Independent. Right, let's talk Manchester United now. In the week, Ruben Amorim lost his job at Old Trafford. Sam Wallace in the Sunday Telegraph has been focusing, Johnny, on Roy Keane's assertion that Ferguson, Sir Alex Ferguson, is hanging around Old Trafford like a bad smell, and maybe he's advising maybe too much about who the next manager should be. He is saying, is Sam Wallace, that the pundits' claim smacks only of a grudge he cannot let go. But he goes on to say that the Ferguson legacy remains omnipresent. There is Darren Fletcher recounting how he called his old manager before taking on the first team job, an instinct that felt similar to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer worrying about parking in his former manager's space. What's your take on this? Roy Keane is implying that Sir Alex Ferguson is heavily involved in all the processes at United. I think you're hearing different, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess my take would be United have 99 problems and Fergie ain't one. Bit corny. No, just, 999. Look, the long and the short of it is he's seen on television when the camera pans to the stands, but the days of him being closely involved are gone. He's not even paid by the club anymore. He's there because, as Sam writes in the piece, he's an 84-year-old man who's following a football club that he loves. And in that time since retiring, I don't think he's barely made a pronouncement about the state of the first team, what kind of job the manager's doing. There's an interesting piece by Paul Hayward, who knows Ferguson very well. He wrote his autobiography, one of his autobiographies. Points out that Fergie's union background means that he was very conscious of not being seen like Matt Busby was seen, as interfering with managers. His presence is there as a symbol of what United used to be, and that's the issue, not his actual involvement. But Roy Keane knows how to put a tackle in, doesn't he? And that comment was classic Roy. Obviously, their animus goes back to Roy leaving the club in 2005, and perhaps opinions that I don't think Roy's ever going to budge from. But this isn't about Matt Busby's situation. For one thing, the Busby situation was he was a sort of intimidating presence to sort of novice managers or kind of managers that were seen as not big characters. But United have had some of the biggest characters in the dugout. They've had Mourinho, they've had Van Gaal, they've had strong character like Amorim himself, pretty stubborn guy. The thought that Fergie is there kind of influencing them or intimidating them is just one of Roy's TV moments, but I don't think reality.
Miguel, Johnny mentioned Paul Hayward's piece there. In The Observer, it says one call to Sir Alex exposed the deep malaise at the heart of Manchester United. And talking about that call that Fletcher made, he says when Fletcher tapped Ferguson's number on his phone screen, the call travelled across all the waste of the last 13 years to the genius behind 13 Premier League titles, 5 FA Cups and 2 Champions Leagues. It resurrected the principle that Ferguson might have something useful to say about what should happen next. And he did, by articulating something the Glazers and parts of the Ineos ownership don't understand. The job now, is what he said to Darren Fletcher, is to do what's best for Manchester United. What Manchester United are doing at the moment is bringing in an interim in Darren Fletcher, talking about bringing another interim after Darren Fletcher before appointing a permanent manager in the summer. Is that what is best for Manchester United?
Yeah, definitely. Also, it gives them the kind of space to actually think about this clearly, which I think really is required. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues of modern Manchester United, and this feeds into a lot of themes of the show today, I think they've got to decide what they actually want to look like as a club. And I mean, like in terms of, especially with one so that is so obsessed with identity. It doesn't really have a football identity. And if you pick one, and this is essential in modern football, then everything flows from that. And that was one of the issues with the Amram appointment, that really in the summer of 2024, and there is context for this because the new leadership was coming in, key figures weren't in place, but in the summer of 2024, they really should have taken it almost as starting from scratch and thinking about what do we want this team to look out. Instead, they ended up, I suppose, clumsily persisting with Ten Hag, viable reasons, and then going for Amram, who's probably more wedded to a specific style than any modern coach, which kind of goes against that sort of best practice that we're talking about. And just like Sam touches on this in the piece there, or at least kind of, I think this is a bit of what he's getting at. I think where the Ferguson thing is significant, I suppose, it's not about his influence, because I mean, I think compared to Busby, as Jonathan was saying, Busby was this kind of, this almost ferocious presence there, even if it was kind of implicit. Whereas Ferguson by contract, it almost feels like he's kind of a cuddlier figure in retirement than he...
Busby had the office in the stadium. The manager could literally know that Samat's sitting two or three doors down.
And just on the kind of, I suppose where the phone call is significant is because, you know, as a colleague said to me during the week, I won't out him, but he said, what would have happened if Ferguson said no? Would he have,
not for you, Darren.
Like, I mean, which kind of shows a little bit the absurdity of this. And it's like United are now in a position, and this is where there are echoes of kind of the 17 years between Busby, where they're looking for the next Messiah. Or the next, and there's almost biblical themes to it.
Jackie, just on that, look, it looks like it's going to be either Ole Gunnar Solskjaer or Michael Carrick. There are two things at play here, aren't there? Who's the better coach and who's going to help Manchester United in that short term until the end of the season, but also from an optics perspective. And are they the same thing? Who would be the right choice at this stage?
Well, they tried Ole Gunnar Solskjaer more significantly, of course, than Carrick. So I would absolutely say Carrick out the two. It's weird, isn't it? Because Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson's not the problem here. He's the figurehead. He's the guy that brought so much success that has helped create and amplify the fan base that was already there. It was already a huge club, of course, before him. But what he did was extraordinary. Him sitting in the stands is not the problem. The problem is that it's been an absolute shambles ever since he left, with lurching from one style to another, to a different manager to another, and just going with no kind of serious clue as to what to do next. And it all comes from the top, doesn't it? And it wasn't just that Sir Alex Ferguson left, it was that David Gill left, and the way of doing things was exposed in their absence. And the fact that the first signings under David Moyes, the key ones, the likes of Fellaini from Everton and Juan Mata from Chelsea on a free, kind of low-hanging fruit, they really struggled to really kick off the whole process with a new identity from then, and they've not gone back to that. So in terms of the two managers, I would absolutely say Carrick, give him a go, because I don't see why you'd go back to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. But on the Fergie, Sir Alex Ferguson, sorry, quite disrespectful, front, listening to Peter Schmeichel, legendary goalkeeper, the other day, who's saying that no, Sir Alex isn't involved at all. He speaks to him a lot, and he said he's not. He's just there in the stands, but he's not having a say at all in what's going on. And why shouldn't Darren Fletcher pick up the phone to him? It's getting ridiculous now. You can pick up the phone to whoever he likes. You're not going to not pick up the phone to somebody who's been there and seen and done it all.
Johnny, your piece dramatically headlined the death of the manager in the Sunday Times. And one paragraph I want to pick out: the poor souls in dugouts have come to seem as dispensable as everything else to the regimes running clubs today. With their 5-year plans and PR, they leave us in no doubt who the visionaries are. And for fans still used to rallying round managers, it is disquieting. It's not gone, by their own admission, how Ineos would have wanted it to since they've taken over. Under their management, Dan Ashworth has come and gone. Keeping Eric Ten Hag was an admission of a mistake, and the Ruben Amorim experiment hasn't worked because after 14 months he's no longer there. There is big pressure now on Ineos to make sure that they not only get the interim right for the rest of the season, but the permanent one as well.
Oh, they have to, and you've catalogued some of the mistakes. The thought that Jim Ratcliffe, 2 years on from arriving and promising to restore Manchester United to world dominance, could be starting a year with Darren Fletcher in charge, just kind of says everything about where the project's gone. And that's with full respect to Darren, who's a very promising coach and a really good figure. And But it's an admission for Ratcliffe where we are. I think what I was trying to get to in that piece was we're in an era now where we're seeing anger from supporters now directed at, not at the managers necessarily, but at the boards, at the owners, at the execs. And one of the reasons for that is that they have taken control of the football clubs and they tell us how clever they are. Ineos, Jim Ratcliffe, Dave Brailsford have been telling us for years how clever they are. So this is a consequence. And in modern football, that position of the manager has been downgraded and reduced. There are only 5 managers now in the Premier League. All the others are head coaches. Everyone wants to have a plan, a strategy and a structure, and the head coach just slips into that. Well, fine, but if it goes wrong, you're going to take the heat. So this is the time for Ineos to finally prove their cleverness, I guess, and get that appointment right, because it has to be somebody that will bring this great club back to life. They've done a lot in the background. They've put some really quality people in big positions. You know, Mike Sansoni, the head of data they brought in from Mercedes, Christopher Vavel, the technical director in charge of recruitment now, really well rated. They've invested in Carrington. They've done what they would sort of say was the necessary groundwork for the club. But unless you can show that the decision making in the key positions right, and empower that manager a bit, perhaps not be afraid if that manager's got a strong character and a bit of power, then all the other good stuff isn't going to work for you. And it's interesting they've gone back to looking at ex-Fergie players as their interims. It's not just sort of let's go back the past and remember what Fergie did. I think one of the reasons is these are people who are seen as knowing how to handle Manchester United. You know, the unique scrutiny, pressure, culture of Manchester United. That's why you go back to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. That's why you go back to Michael Carrick. Because one of the things they found with Amorim was looked at the profile, and this isn't Captain Hindsight. At the time, I thought they were doing the right thing. One of Europe's top young coaches, yes, totally wedded to a system, but a guy on the up. Everyone in Portugal's telling you, this guy's a poet, he's such a great communicator, he oozes charisma. And he walks in the door at Manchester United, and because of all of the factors, that disappears. And those good human qualities become things you maybe don't want.
He was tactically intransigent and didn't have the players he needed when he came mid-season. But surely that's on the people who are appointing him. They're looking at a guy who plays this. This is the way he's had success. This is how he's going to play. Those players at Manchester United don't work with that. It was surely doomed to failure from the start, and that's on the people who appointed him.
Well, I think they thought Amorim was going to flex. And Amorim had sort of intimated to them that I will come in, I'll do my 3-4-3, and I will grow to playing more of a Manchester United style. And he never did. And his last game against Leeds, 6 players who are defenders at heart on the pitch with 2 holding midfielders. Against Leeds, you know, Wolves, with all respect, it was 5 defenders and 2 holding midfilders at home to the bottom club, matching up against the bottom club. And I don't think it's about formations, and I don't think the identity of Manchester United is a mystery. It's a club that plays attacking football. It's a club that sets out to entertain, that sets out to thrill supporters. So a bloke, it doesn't matter what formation he wants to put them in, but a bloke that wants 6 defenders and 2 holding midfielders on the pitch against a team threatened relegation isn't your man. And as you say, maybe you should know that before appointing him.
I do where exactly what we're talking about with Frank a little bit, where that's where the weight of the club starts to almost kind of disrupt someone's thinking, because it's almost like they lose clarity and lose sight of what it's about. And there was this kind of odd obstinacy to Amorim, and from again, I was touching this earlier with Frank. It's from speaking to people all week about these issues. No matter someone's previous status or profile at a club where there's less exposure, as I said, you just don't know until they get in the door at a club like this. And it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the structure, and I think when you speak to people on the ground at Carrington, they would say it is night and day even to 18 months ago. United have changed in that regard. But this is where this next step is so crucial, because you were getting at this a bit in your piece. You do wonder whether, kind of that clean structure and a pure head coach can work at a mid-level club. Yeah. But at the biggest clubs, precisely because of the weight, they do actually need the sort of personality that can carry this and also be a bit of a figurehead because of the institutional memory and the effect of what these clubs are. There is something bigger about that.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, that, you know, as I say, we've got 15 head coaches out of the 20, but the 3 top clubs are the ones where the manager has the biggest say and the biggest personality. You know, Guardiola at City, Arteta at Arsenal, and Unai Emery at Villa. Maybe that tells you something.
And also,
Sorry,
and also don't forget that it's only managers in this country that ever front up at press conferences. So you can call them a head coach, and if they're the one that doesn't necessarily have the power, somebody above them's going, we want to buy him, we want to sell him, we want to buy him, we want to sell him. The poor bloke who fronts up at the press conference is the one that has to defend these decisions, even if he didn't want that player and he didn't want to sell that player and he didn't particularly want to play this formation that he's been told by somebody higher up he's got to play. This, I think, is why we're in such a mess with so many of the top clubs or clubs in the Premier League in this country.
And also, in terms of some of those clubs you mentioned, they actually... It's not just about the manager, I think, as well. It's also the structure is different. I mean, if you look at Pep Guardiola, OK, it's changed now with Viana. But one of the reasons City worked so well for so long is because, I mean, the technical director, Chiki Begiristain, is Guardiola's longtime friend, his former teammate, who he also feels he owes his career to because he gave him a chance at Barca. At Arsenal, Arteta was very early on. It wasn't kind of a top-down structure. He was included in a football leadership team where it was a collaborative effort. And then with Emery, obviously, I mean, the club basically said to him, like, here's the keys to Villa. Draw us your ideal club. Yeah,
technical director there, well, sporting director there's Roberto Arlabi, I think, played with Emery. Comes from his hometown, you know, like a lifelong friend. And before that, it was Monchi, and they've allowed him, as you say, the owner gave him a blank sheet of paper and said, draw your club. Look, I do think those days are gone in general for football because of the complexity, but finding that balance where you get the strong character for a top club, strong character manager, and empowering the vision, that does still seem to be the way that you achieve success.
The relationships are absolutely key. There's no point in having somebody who's thrusting a certain player, a certain type of striker that's not the profile the manager wants onto it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So those relationships are absolutely key. The sporting director, the manager, if they are aligned, they don't have to love each other as human beings and go around each other's house for dinner, but they do really have to have a footballing understanding together of where they're going. Gary Neville says Carlo Ancelotti is his choice. Give me a name, each of you. Who do you think would be the best Manchester United manager permanently? Well, Sebastian Hoeneß has been mentioned from Stuttgart, hasn't he? He's an interesting one. That's the trouble. There isn't anybody really obvious at the moment. Glasner, not a good day this morning to be talking about that. Potentially him, having won the Europa League. Has he got the aura, the presence? Is there anybody to tick all those boxes at the moment? You can see why Gary says Ancelotti. You can, but he'd want his son with him, wouldn't
he? you can see that. I do think they've got to try for the best, the Man United. So they try for Luis Enrique, and they try, if they're going domestic, they try for Unai Emery, because they're not going to get Arteta or Guardiola. Or they try for Thomas Tuchel, and that's where you begin your search.
I mean, Tuchel was quite close in 2024, and he felt like if we are talking about this issue of being able to carry the weight of a club like that, he maybe feels it close. Him or Luis Enrique, I suppose. Especially, there are murmurs now that Luis Enrique will maybe leave Paris Saint-Germain at the end of the season, and it's a very different Luis Enrique, I think, from even 5 years ago when clubs like Chelsea were interested, United thought about it, because winning that Champions League at Paris Saint-Germain, I think, it's evolved his career and also maybe his outlook as well. Just very, very quickly, Jackie, before we leave United and go to a break, the Sun on Sunday talks about a potential exit in the summer for Bruno Fernandes, with teammates fearing that he will leave come the summer. Would that surprise you? And is that maybe something United need to start thinking about now, given his age and given the amount of money they could potentially get for him, and then reinvest with the new manager? Well, it depends what the bigger plan is in terms of... It's impossible to tell now, isn't it? Because he's such a key figure for them at the moment. But if they have a completely new revamp with a new midfield, Adam Wharton has been linked, rightly so. I think he'd be fabulous there. But maybe he can play in, the 2-10s with Cunha behind the striker. I think it all depends on who they want to bring in the summer. But if he were to go, not a huge surprise. But if he stays, regardless what happens, it needs a whole revamp, particularly in the midfield area. Brilliant stuff. Right.
Martí, que si no está es por motivos de fuerza mayor, así que todo el ánimo para él, un abrazo grande y veremos si su Rayo le puede dar hoy una alegría.
En troncos de Sergio García junto a Verdú, cuando ya se cogen esas cartas secretas. A turno de Aitor Vives, encara Aitor, arriba. Desviado el remate de Aitor Vives, la llega a tocar
Sí.
Paul Lechuga.
Días en los que quizá podrían haber tenido mejor resultado, los porteros han estado ahí.
Viene el balón para Manu. Precisamente un portero es quien le da el primer gol a Troncos. ¡Gol! En la frontal del área decide combinar sobre la figura de Paul Lechuga. Vértice del área, probará con el regate. No, la cambia entera. ¡Qué balón de Lechuga para Alegre! ¡Para adentro! ¡Gol! Pues espérate porque viene Fraile a esta línea de fondo. La pone Fraile. El balón para Poc, que recorta delante de Ferres. ¡Poc! ¡Qué parada abajo! De Manu Martín, lo hizo de fábula.
Han señalado cesión.
Libre en directo, eso es.
Sí, libre en directo.
Ojo que la pone rápido en movimiento, los Troncos para adentro. Sergio. ¡Gol! Vamos al penalti, presidente. Lo tirará en paralelo a la portería Perchita. Perchita ante Lechuga. Le pega Perchita. ¡Lo ha parado! Con suspense, con incertidumbre, pero acabó sacando finalmente. Pues venga, todo tuyo. Ahí está, algo bajito, capo. Verdú. Contacto con la pelota en el carril central, abre precisamente para Vives. El centro acaba siendo portería porque evitaron que el pase de la muerte pudiese llegar. Pero si eres de Barcelona y quieres vivir la emoción de la última jornada en el Cupra Arena de tanto la Kings League Infojobs como de la Queens League, puedes entrar también en el centro y el remate. Ahora te lo cuento porque es un golazo. ¡Gol! Frankie Purti, irá Frankie para darle la vuelta al Rayo. Frankie lo ha parado. Lo ha parado Manu Martín. En la porfía con Ian, en todo caso no se aplica nada y viene el ataque ahora de los Troncos. ¡Lechuga! Román Alegre está bien, gol doble.
Gol doble para Rayo. Sí.
El capitán de los Troncos combina con Vives. Lechuga. Era muy difícil porque le botó justo en el momento. Un penalti shutout. Tanto sonoras como lumínicas del Cupra Arena. Sorroche para el tercero. Lechuga. Decide combinar sobre Paul Román. Aparece Román Alegre que filtra el envío. El remate para adentro. ¡Gol de oro! ¡Cántalo! ¡Gol! ¡Gol! Del Rayo de Barcelona. Llegar y besar el santo Joel Paredes.
Frankie Purti, Prime MVP, por fin ha llegado esa victoria tan esperada para el Rayo.
Sí, ha costado mucho. La verdad que aquí ganar cuesta muchísimo y hay que valorarlo mucho. Y como ha dicho el míster, al final hoy era un partido amistoso que encarábamos como preparación para el partido donde nos jugamos la vida, que es el partido de play-out del Mundial. Y esperemos que esto nos sirva para encarar una buena dinámica y encarar ese partido de la mejor manera posible.
Hoy no ha podido estar el Presi, no sé si nos estará viendo desde casa y no sé si le quieres decir algo.
Yo creo que sí nos estará viendo. Le mando un fuerte abrazo. Esta semana ha sido una semana difícil para él y espero que le anime, tanto la victoria del femenino como la nuestra este fin de semana. Espero que le anime y que le ayude a pasar la semana de la mejor manera posible y decirle que le queremos mucho y que vamos a dar la vida para que el Rayo esté en el Mundial.
Ojalá que así sea. Enhorabuena. Gracias.